The designation of February as Black History Month came about in the second half of the 20th century. Its predecessor was Negro History Week, which got its start in 1926. But considering the first enslaved Africans reached the colony of Virginia 400 years ago, Black history and the study of it is a relatively new concept in this country. Joining us to talk about the current state of Black history is Dr. Christopher Tinson. He's an associate professor of history at St. Louis University and department chair of African American Studies. Welcome, Dr. Tinson.
Thank you for having me.
Well, my first question is, what is the state of Black history, especially given recent headlines that might suggest it's actually under siege?
Sure. I think it's controversial because it's been marginalized in our mainstream history for so many years. And our school systems haven't really appreciated the full contribution of African people to the Western Hemisphere, much less to the United States. We haven't fully appreciated that, and so therefore we haven't fully integrated it into our school instruction at the history and social studies level. So there's a great gap in our general civic knowledge of African contributions. And so because of that, it's a constant battle to include more facts of history, facts of African American history into our mainstream curriculum so that we can influence the general citizenry.
What kind of response do you get, say, from first year students at the university? Are they really eager to soak up new information?
Absolutely. They're constantly asking, why don't I know this already? And I tell them, just like you go into your sociology class or your biology class, you don't know what's going on the first day. It's the same thing in African American studies, African American history. You know, it might be an area that's new to you, but it's an area that if systematically and rigorously studied, you will come out feeling a better sense of yourself as a citizen and a better sense of our sense of democracy and the practice of democracy.
You have researched so many aspects of race and how it affects what goes on in this country. What has fascinated you the most? I know race in sports is one
Sure.
area. Is that a favorite of yours?
It is a favorite, but I think in general terms, I think just the story of resilience and the story of, a resistance to just laying down to the conditions that you found yourselves within, and understanding that the history of African people in the Western Hemisphere, of which the United States is a part, does not begin and end with enslavement, right? And so there's a lot of stories that predate enslavement that include African people, as well as the experience after enslavement and how African Americans have helped recreate society in a more democratic fashion, contributing positively in many areas of life, including politics, sports, health education, medicine, and of course, education itself.
And that encompasses so much.
Sure.
As an educator, how do you get your hands around that? How do you wrap it?
In your opening, you mentioned one of our earlier predecessors, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who created Negro History Week, that got turned into African American History Month, Black History Month in 1976. His organization that he created is called the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, ASALH for short. It's been meeting every October for over 100 years. And that's where historians of the African experience, they're not all people of color, but many of them are. The historians of the African experience gather every year to share their research, share new findings, share new archives that students can go and dig in and find new stories to write about. It's a professional organization and the longest running professional historical organization for African Americans.
I think our audience may just assume that when you're looking at a Department of African American Studies that everyone that is teaching that is African American.
Sure.
But I know of several people who are white and that is their specialty.
Sure.
What draws them to that?
I think a commitment to knowledge in a very general but also specific sense, a sense that you can learn about the history of humanity through looking at African people. And so it's not just studying African people, it's studying humanity, but just using African diaspora communities as that kind of testing ground to understand what has gone through their lives, what they've experienced, et cetera. So I think their commitment to justice as well, a sense of everybody having their history represented, and the fact that there's so much that we don't know that I think is very much interesting to scholars who are not of color to study the African experience.
Do you have any specific goals for what you would like to accomplish in your department in the coming year or so?
I think modestly, I'll say that we want to be a first-rate site of research and teaching and mentoring in the Midwest. You know, when we think about African American studies, we want you to think about St. Louis University, but that's going to determine what kind of students that we can recruit, what kind of faculty that we can recruit, and it helps us to shine the light on the kind of students that we produce already, who are going on to graduate school, going on to professional degrees, going on to entrepreneurial stations. So we train folks to do rigorous research, and we train you to think critically. We train you to teach and read and write critically, so that any job that you decide to take on, you'll be ready for.
I know one of the things that I've learned, and this was like through the History Museum, was how much civil rights history there is here.
Sure.
When did you find out?
Probably in high school. You know, I had a wonderful teacher coming from Los Angeles public school systems, and we were during the time before there was such an emphasis on testing, and so our professor was able to put the textbook aside and have us read the autobiography of Malcolm X. This was 10th grade, and I still have that copy of the autobiography of Malcolm X. That was my first time reading that, and it basically changed my life. And I think people who read that text in particular have that same story. But one of the texts that I use in class most often is The Souls of Black Folk by W.B. Du Bois, written in 1903. And that book is really a chronicle of the life of African Americans after Reconstruction and during and after Reconstruction, where I argue that, you know, new forms of state oppression, violence, and also African American resistance to those things were really prominent and necessary. They created organizations, churches, independent societies, benevolent societies, et cetera, and also educational institutions, including HBCUs, which are in the news a lot these days.
We're going to have another conversation real soon.
Sure.
Dr. Tinson, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.